Alright, so here is my presentation about emergent lit. So, starting point, what is emergent literacy? So it is basically the child's experience with literature and speaking and reading. It happens before they have any formal education. According to our book, emergent literacy starts in the womb, so like it starts with the child's first thoughts and first words, and then their exposure to it, and it continues for their entire life. Some components of emergent literacy are the child's interest in language, their age, their gender, um, their phonemic awareness, and then their intelligence level plays a part as well. So before I continue, I think it's important to talk about what literacy is and what it means to me, because that's kind of what plays into all of this and how I will use it in my classroom. So to me, literacy is being able to think, communicate, express yourself, and understand people when they're doing the same. So understanding when people are talking to you and being able to listen. This, when we think about it, this usually includes reading, writing, speaking, and listening. I think that's really important for a school standpoint of what literacy is, but it's important to remember that there are different types of being literate. So you could be computer literate or emotionally literate, so being able to pick up on other people's feelings, which I think is really important. But for the sake of this presentation and for my future classroom, I like to think of it as reading, writing, speaking, listening, visual communication, that sort of thing. And then it's just very important, I think, in the classroom, that literacy and being literate is something we often forget about. And that's part of why I'm getting my reading minor, is to kind of help bridge that gap, because there are a lot of kids right now who are not literate and are not getting that exposure to literature and to language and reading and all of that in their homes. And, that might not be the parents' fault. That could just be, they don't have time. But I think having children be literate is something really important, because if they aren't literate, they can't really continue in life, and being able to express yourself and your thoughts and your feelings and being able to understand that is really important to me. And that's something that I will stress in my future classroom. And then we studied a little bit about the 5 aspects of literacy. So print concepts. So do the students know what the cover of the book is? Do they know that we read left to right, top to bottom? So phonics, phonemic awareness, I'll talk about both of those a little bit later in the presentation. Sight words, so words that children recognize like they do their own name. And then fluency, which is kind of the most important to me as a future teacher. I think fluency and being literate are the 2 things that I cannot stress enough when it comes to this class. So in the class we studied about the Fabulous 5. So this is from the National Reading Panel, and these are what they consider to be the key essential components that early readers need. But I like to think of them as what children need to not just read, but also write. I think, to me, teaching reading should also be done with teaching writing. I think they go hand in hand. And I think it's kind of silly to, teach them to read and then wait until they read to teach them to write. I think we try to instill a love of reading to children, but I also think that we need to instill a love of writing as well. So I like to think of these 5 concepts as applicable to both. So they are phonemic awareness, phonics. So phonemic awareness is hearing and identifying sounds. So being able to listen to words and pick out phonemes or little chunks of words. Phonics, which is how like phonemes and written symbols work together. Fluency, so reading with expression, accurately, quickly, that kind of thing. comprehension. So are they understanding what they're reading? Are they able to answer questions about their reading afterwards? And then vocabulary acquisition. So finding the vocab that is necessary to read and to write. So teaching phonics can be done a number of different ways. Phonics is usually taught in the transmission model. So the student or the teacher is directly giving the students the information. It's done through explicit instruction, so very direct, very planned and scripted. They use a lot of sight words and word families in phonics instruction. Children do a lot of repetition and practice with different sounds. And they also work with the relationship between sounds and the symbols, so the letters. And then they focus a lot on beginning and ending sounds. I really like phonics. Growing up, we used visual phonics in first grade, and that was one that really worked with me because we got to look at it, we got to hear it, and then we got to do it. So it was very kinesthetic and hands-on, that's how I learn. Well, that won't work for every kid. I personally really like that approach, but I do recognize that the research that we've studied in class does say that it has to have a balanced literacy program, you need to do it with holistic teaching. So, focusing on getting children interested in literature and then breaking it up into parts and teaching them that. Teaching them like whole parts, not chunking it up like you do with phonics. So I agree that you need to use both. I think that's very important. With anything in teaching, you need to make sure that you have a balance of a number of different ways because not every child learns the same and not every child will respond to your teaching the same way. So phonemic awareness is being able to recognize the relationship between sounds and letters, like I said before. The sounds are called phonemes, and it's all done auditorily and orally. So it helps children be able to recognize that there are like rhymes, there's patterns in the sounds that that we say when we talk. It is it's something that all kids need to be successful from what we've studied. It teaches kids that what we say can be written in print, so with letters, which I think, again, is really important to recognize that that's not just reading, it's also writing. It helps them break the code, which is decoding, so that would be reading. So, like, knowing that there is a sound that is represented by a symbol, but encoding, which would be writing, is choosing a symbol to represent the sound. So being able to break the code, I think, goes both ways, and being able to recognize that relationship goes along with both reading and writing. So I think that's very important is when you're teaching phonemic awareness, or, well, I guess you wouldn't directly teach it, but when I'm helping build my students' phonemic awareness, I really will emphasize that this isn't just for reading, it is also for writing, because I think that's often overlooked, but I think phonemic awareness really plays into writing, and I will emphasize that in my class. So it's different from phonological awareness, which even I struggled a little bit with that. Phonological awareness, I think, is also equally important, but through what we learned, it wasn't stressed as much. And then the different components of phonemic awareness, I think, is really important to have children practice with them frequently, not only to, build their phonemic awareness, but also to get them comfortable with words and comfortable with letters and sounds and just kind of expose them to it. So the different components are substitution, isolation, blending, segmentation, deletion, and rhyming. So those are all really important. They help recognize different parts of sounds. Another part of phonemic awareness is having children recognize onsets and rhymes within the syllables. All of those are very important to not just learning to read, but also learning to write. So fluency, this is what I could spend hours talking about. I think it's probably the most important thing we learned in class, personally anyway. Fluency, to me, is going to be one of the biggest parts of my um, instruction in an emergent lit class, or a class with emergent learners. Um, Fluency is important because I think we overlook it. We think about fluency specifically as speed and how fast they can read, but we overlook a huge part, and to me, that is comprehension. I think before you can do anything else with fluency, you need to make sure children are comprehending what they're reading. I don't care if my students can read a book in an hour, like a novel. I don't care. I want them to be able to understand it. I would rather them read a 2-page picture book and understand it and enjoy it and have fun reading it than I would if they could read it fast. So fluency has a couple different components. It's being able to recognize the words and then comprehending what those words are. That's the main point. But it also is reading text accurately, so making sure, you're saying the words right, you're pronouncing, of course I mess up on pronunciation. Reading quickly, but also reading with prosody, so reading it like you would speaking. So putting the emphasis on different words in the sentence, putting emphasis on different syllables within a word, talking conversationally, so with expression, with emphasis, all that, which I think is really important. How many people do we know that read out loud that talk like a robot and there's no emphasis? I think that kind of takes the fun out of reading for everybody, and reading is supposed to be fun. So another part of fluency would be different types of vocabulary. So sight word vocabulary, which we spend a ton of time working with children on. Words that they need to recognize just like they do their own name, knowing it off the top of their head, no hesitation, understanding what it means. And then comprehension vocabulary, so specific to what they're reading, maybe helps them understand, that kind of thing. Phonics plays into fluency. It's not enough to just work on phonics, though. It's kind of a tool to help you get to fluency. It's not the end goal. I think a lot of people say, okay, we've learned phonics, we're done, good job. But phonics and the different vocabs help play into fluency and becoming fluent readers, and then, in turn, becoming literate. The most important part to me of fluency and building a child's fluency is I'm going to have them read. They're going to hate it, but they will learn to love it. In my Prac 2 class, our CT let them read all the time. They would beg her to read, and they loved it and they enjoyed it, and it's because they were understanding what they were reading. They had comprehension. They loved it. They were fluent. They were all literate. It was fantastic, and that is what I want to teach my kids is read, read, read. I don't care how fast you read. I don't care what level you're reading at. I mean, I do in some capacity as a teacher, but I just want them to read and to be able to read and do it fluently and to become literate citizens. I think that honestly is the basis of my philosophy for emergent literacy is read, become fluent, become literate, and world domination comes next. So I've kind of talked about all of the things I find the most important. Again, becoming literate, there's a number of different ways to do that. There's a number of different ways to increase fluency, and honestly, I have no idea what specifically I would do. I think we've been, through this class, been given a huge amount of resources on how to do that. Like readers theater or choral readings or, there's all sorts of different things that we've done throughout this class to help them learn. But it's really hard for me to say without actually working with emergent readers and also without knowing my students specifically. But yeah, I will emphasize fluency and literacy every day. I don't want a single day to pass in my classroom where the child are not reading in some capacity and enjoying reading. I know that's kind of a huge goal, but I think it's really important to expose them to reading and writing. And I think sometimes we forget, maybe, in some classrooms.